Most people think ahead a few hours, some a few days, the rare ones maybe a few months. But Machiavelli, he'd think in entire timelines, not because he wanted to predict the future, but because he designed it. If he lived today, in a world where attention is currency and everyone's next move is visible online, he'd quietly move 2, 3, even 10 steps ahead before anyone else realized a game was being played at all. The difference between ordinary intelligence and Machiavellian strategy is simple. Intelligence reacts. Strategy prepares. The first law of a strategic mind begins where most people stop before they act. Machiavelli believed impulse was the fastest way to lose control. People speak, post, or decide because they feel something, not because they've thought something. To think ahead, he would deliberately create a pause between thought and reaction. Imagine you're provoked by a coworker, insulted online, or pressured to make a quick decision. A normal mind seeks emotional release. A Machiavellian mind seeks leverage. Every time you delay a reaction, you gain seconds of observation, and those seconds are where real power hides. The person who can remain silent while others reveal themselves has already won half the game. His second law would sound deceptively simple. Anticipate self-interest, not morals, not logic, interest. Everyone's next move is guided by what benefits them, not by what's right. That's predictable, and predictability is control. Machiavelli would map people like pieces on a board, not by title or emotion, but by what they secretly value: recognition, validation, power, revenge, comfort. Once you know what drives someone, you don't need to control them. You just need to place the right temptation within reach. The modern Machiavelli would thrive in a world run by algorithms because he'd realize people are more predictable than ever. They tell you exactly what they crave every time they click. But the third law separates players from architects. Never reveal the full picture. Most people seek to be understood. A strategist seeks to remain unreadable. Machiavelli would move in fragments, just enough information to create confusion, just enough truth to be believable. He'd understand that mystery isn't about silence, it's about selective clarity in meetings, relationships, even digital presence. He'd release ideas like breadcrumbs, not blueprints. Because once people think they understand you, they stop fearing you. But if they're never quite sure what you'll do next, they adjust their behavior around you. That's psychological gravity. The less they know, the more they speculate. And speculation is control disguised as curiosity. The fourth law: design your environment to feed your mind forward. Machiavelli wouldn't rely on sudden bursts of genius. He'd engineer his surroundings to constantly feed him signals others ignore. While everyone scrolls for entertainment, he'd scroll for patterns. How people respond to outrage, how opinions shift, which desires resurface every few weeks. He'd see culture not as noise, but as a map of collective weakness. Every trending topic would be a window into what the masses will believe next. To him, thinking ahead means studying repetition, because the world doesn't really change, it only cycles faster. And those who see the cycle early appear prophetic. The fifth law of the strategic mind: disguise ambition as duty. In a society that punishes open hunger for power, Machiavelli would wear masks of virtue. He'd say the right things, align with the right causes, but each word would serve a private blueprint. The genius isn't in pretending, it's in genuinely blending purpose with profit. He'd appear as the helper while quietly constructing influence. Modern people overshare their goals, broadcasting every plan and achievement. Machiavelli would do the opposite: make others feel like they're the ones leading him, while his ideas slowly steer the room. The key is to never appear to be the one moving first. A true strategist makes others carry his ambition as their own. The sixth law: treat emotion as data. Most people drown in feelings, but Machiavelli would dissect them like codes. Anger tells you where pride hides. Fear tells you where weakness lies. Desire tells you what someone would betray for. He'd never suppress emotions, he'd translate them. When someone insults him, he wouldn't think they hate me, he'd think they're revealing what they envy. When someone flatters him, he'd ask, what do they want to use me for? every reaction from others would be a diagnostic test. To think ahead, you must first learn to read people backwards, to trace every outburst, compliment, and silence to the motive behind it. The world is filled with emotional noise. Machiavelli would listen for patterns beneath it. The seventh law: build mental layers. He would never think in single outcomes. Instead, every decision would branch into 3 or more contingencies. Most people hope for one result and panic when it doesn't happen. Machiavelli would expect every result, including betrayal, resistance, or chaos. For him, uncertainty wasn't a threat, it was a playground. He'd ask, if they agree, what does that reveal? If they refuse, what advantage does that open? The result: he would never be surprised. Every scenario would serve him, even failure. Because when you think ahead, you stop needing perfect plans. You just need adaptable structures. That's why his moves would seem impossible to predict. Every path you block is one he already accounted for. The fifth law: master appearances without becoming their prisoner. In today's world, perception is power, but Machiavelli would never let perception consume him. He'd polish his image just enough to gain access, never to become addicted to validation. He'd post rarely, speak precisely, and make absence his loudest statement. The moment people wonder what you're doing, you're already ahead. He'd exploit how society overvalues visibility. Everyone's screaming for attention, he'd win through silence. The world rewards the loud, but it obeys the calm. And the ninth law, the crown of them all: play for inevitability. Machiavelli wouldn't care about quick wins or applause. His focus would be inevitability, positioning himself so that no matter what others choose, he still benefits. That's the final form of thinking ahead. Not predicting others' moves, but building a reality where every move leads back to you. A modern Machiavelli would do this by embedding himself into systems, be it social networks, workplaces, or ideas, where removing him would cost others too much. True power isn't in control. It's in indispensability. The one who cannot be excluded has already conquered the game. Each of these laws operates like gears in a clock, interlocked, silent, but always moving. The world believes the future belongs to those who are smartest. Machiavelli knew it belongs to those who are prepared. You can't always predict the next storm, but you can always be the one standing when it passes. He wouldn't obsess over speed or visibility. He'd obsess over positioning. Every glance, every silence, every withdrawal would mean something. To the untrained eye, he'd seem lucky, but luck only favors those who think far enough to make chaos useful. The strategic mind isn't born, it's trained. Every hesitation you resist, every detail you observe, every emotion you dissect builds it. That's what Machiavelli understood before anyone else. That thinking ahead isn't a trick, it's a habit, a discipline of patience in a world addicted to immediacy. While others are reacting, explaining, and defending, he's already 3 moves ahead, quietly watching as the inevitable unfolds exactly as he intended. And that's how he'd think ahead of everyone else today. Not by outsmarting people, but by understanding them so deeply they'd never realize they were following his design until it was far too late. The hardest part about thinking ahead is resisting the urge to be seen thinking ahead. Most people reveal their strategy by the way they prepare. They talk about their next project, their new connection, their big move. Machiavelli would never. He'd understand that the moment people notice you're planning, they'll start building defenses. That's why the true strategist moves invisibly, hiding preparation behind normalcy. He'd smile, nod, play along, while mentally building maps of how every person could be used later. Thinking ahead doesn't mean rushing into the future. It means quietly building it while everyone else is still talking about their plans.
He'd start every interaction with one question. What does this person think I want? Because the answer reveals how they'll try to manipulate you. Once you know that, you can reverse the current. If they think you want approval, withdraw. If they think you want opportunity, pretend disinterest. If they think you want peace, hint at unpredictability. Machiavelli would weaponize perception. He'd know that the more people assume they've read you, the easier it becomes to make them miscalculate. And every miscalculation they make gives you time. Time to observe, time to adjust, time to lead without force. He'd also understand that the modern battlefield isn't physical, it's informational. Everyone is drowning in data, but starving for insight. To think ahead, you can't just consume information, you must interpret it differently. While others chase breaking news, Machiavelli would trace the patterns behind it. He'd ask, what are people emotionally responding to? What's not being said? Who benefits from this narrative existing? He'd see what others miss, the motive behind the message. In a world of manipulation, the person who understands why people believe something controls what they'll believe next. And he'd never underestimate boredom. That's another secret modern weakness. People can't sit still enough to think strategically. They need stimulation, validation, noise. Machiavelli would make boredom his laboratory while others scroll for distraction. He'd let silence sharpen him. The best ideas emerge in stillness, not in chaos. He'd use solitude like a weapon, not isolation, but incubation. A place to project different versions of the future and test them without consequence. The irony is, people will always call such stillness laziness until that quiet thinker suddenly seems to have predicted everything. He'd know that long-term strategy is impossible without emotional detachment, and not the fake kind people perform online, but the real kind that comes from internal independence. The moment your sense of worth depends on reactions, you've lost control of your foresight. Machiavelli would protect his inner equilibrium like a fortress. No matter who praised or criticized him, he'd never let it alter his direction. He'd know that thinking ahead requires clarity, and clarity dies the moment emotion dictates your next move. The strategist's calm isn't apathy, it's armor. But even armor can become a prison. So he'd make sure to stay flexible. Machiavelli would say, don't fall in love with your strategy, fall in love with adjustment. The danger with intelligence is rigidity. You see a pattern and you start worshiping it. But the world changes faster than any plan. The modern Machiavelli would adjust in real time. If his environment evolved, so would he. If a person changed, his approach would too. That's what makes him impossible to trap. His ego isn't tied to consistency. It's tied to effectiveness. To him, hypocrisy isn't a flaw if it achieves precision. Adaptation is the highest form of intelligence. He'd also know how to exploit predictability in institutions. Systems, whether governments, corporations, or platforms, don't change fast. They pretend to evolve, but repeat their cycles. Machiavelli would master bureaucracy the same way he mastered courts, by studying routine. He'd notice which words trigger compliance, which structures can be bypassed, which people feel most unseen and therefore easiest to sway. Modern people fight the system head-on. Machiavelli would let the system fight itself. The key to thinking ahead isn't resistance, it's redirection. He'd never waste energy pushing walls when he could simply walk through unlocked doors everyone else overlooked.
And perhaps most importantly, he'd weaponize timing, not luck, timing. He'd know when to appear, when to vanish, when to wait. The crowd acts immediately. The strategist acts inevitably. Every move would be measured not by emotion, but by readiness. He'd hold back from speaking until others had exposed their positions. He'd release an idea only when the climate was ripe for it to dominate. He'd disappear right before being predictable, return right before being forgotten. Timing, to him, would be the most underestimated form of dominance. Because no matter how clever you are, if you move too soon or too late, even genius looks like madness. To think ahead in today's world, Machiavelli would observe one tragic pattern. People live entirely in reaction, reacting to news, to opinions, to trends, to each other. He'd understand that whoever breaks free from reaction becomes untouchable. His goal would not be to stay informed, but to stay unprovoked. Once you're unprovoked, your energy becomes terrifying. You stop dancing to the rhythm others set. You start composing your own. That's when the world notices. But by then, it's already too late for them to catch up. Machiavelli would say the greatest illusion of intelligence is speed. Everyone believes that to stay ahead, you must move faster, post faster, decide faster. But haste is how people reveal their strategy. He'd think of speed the way a chess master does. Not how quickly you move a piece, but how slowly you force the opponent to move theirs. He'd know that patience isn't passive. It's psychological warfare. While others waste momentum chasing every new opportunity, he'd be building a foundation so stable that when the time comes to act, one move changes everything. The modern world rewards visibility, but Machiavelli would remind you that power grows best in the dark. He'd live by an invisible principle. The slower you appear, the faster you advance. Imagine two people building influence. One posts constantly, debates endlessly, networks everywhere. The other stays quiet, listens, and learns patterns of power. 6 months later, the loud one has attention. The quiet one has leverage. The crowd confuses noise for movement, but Machiavelli would see that every rushed action creates a blind spot. He'd exploit those blind spots like cracks in a fortress, because people who move too fast rarely see who's walking behind them. He'd also play the long game of trust. In a time when betrayal is easy and everyone's paranoid, trust becomes the most valuable weapon. But Machiavelli wouldn't demand it. He designed it. He'd start with small acts of reliability, planting seeds that grow into dependence. Once people associate your presence with stability, they stop questioning your intentions. That's when true influence begins. A Machiavellian mind never takes trust. It earns it strategically, then redirects it. The more someone trusts you, the easier it is to guide their perception without ever issuing a command. But he'd never confuse trust with attachment. He'd give just enough warmth to seem loyal and just enough distance to stay free. Dependence is power, but attachment is vulnerability. If someone's absence can shake your focus, they control you. That's why Machiavelli would build relationships like he built alliances, useful, respectful, but never essential. His strength would come from being able to walk away at any time without emotional collapse. That's not cruelty, it's clarity. To think ahead, you must value freedom more than comfort. Every bond that blinds you to reality is an invisible leash someone else can pull. He'd also understand that influence in the modern world isn't just about what you say. It's about what you allow others to think you mean. The strategist's greatest power lies in ambiguity. Machiavelli would master the art of layered communication. To the average listener, his words would sound agreeable. To the perceptive one, they'd sound strategic. And to himself, they'd be coded commands. He'd understand that truth, when delivered directly, provokes resistance. But when hinted at, it creates reflection. People resist orders but obey implications. That's why he'd speak less to instruct and more to suggest. The modern Machiavelli wouldn't argue. He'd orchestrate interpretations. He'd know that the future belongs to those who can control the tempo of attention. Everyone wants to be viral. He'd want to be inevitable. Viral is fast and forgotten. Inevitable is slow and unstoppable. To think ahead, you must choose not to compete for attention, but to outlast it. Machiavelli would create presence, not noise. When he entered a room, he'd let silence introduce him. When he spoke, it would be short, sharp, and heavy with meaning. People would leave wondering what else he's capable of. He'd understand that curiosity lasts longer than admiration, and he'd be ruthless with his mental energy. Most people scatter it on trivialities, arguments, gossip, comparison. Machiavelli would treat focus as sacred currency.
Every distraction is a theft of strategy. He'd cut off conversations that lead nowhere, ignore criticism that reveals no intelligence, and avoid crowds that dilute clarity. He'd spend hours observing one thing deeply rather than glancing at 100 things shallowly. Because to predict the future, you don't need to see everything. You just need to notice what everyone else keeps missing. He'd never chase perfection either. Perfection is paralysis disguised as ambition. Machiavelli would prefer precision. Accurate enough to hit the target, flexible enough to adjust mid-flight. The perfectionist fears mistakes. The strategist learns to weaponize them. Every misstep reveals more about the battlefield. He'd move through failures like a spy moves through shadows, collecting information, never losing direction. That's why his calm would seem almost supernatural. It's not that he never failed, it's that he never stopped thinking while failing. And perhaps the most overlooked truth, Machiavelli would never waste a crisis. The moment things go wrong, most people panic, blame, retreat. He'd step forward, because chaos reveals what order hides. Who's loyal, who's fearful, who's opportunistic in uncertainty. You see true human nature. That's where he'd gain the clearest map of who he's dealing with. To him, a crisis is not a disaster. It's an X-ray of character. The more people fall apart, the clearer he can rebuild his advantage. Thinking ahead isn't about avoiding chaos. It's about using it as fuel. He'd look at today's world and smile, because it's exactly the kind of environment he'd dominate. Loud, emotional, impulsive, endlessly distracted. Every condition that weakens others would strengthen him. He'd thrive not because he's superhuman, but because he's trained to do what no one else does. Pause, observe, and move deliberately. His secret would be boring to most people, preparation. But that's the difference between those who react to power and those who quietly become it. Every powerful thinker eventually learns that control doesn't come from knowing what to do next. It comes from understanding what others think you'll do next. That's where Machiavelli would separate himself from even the most intelligent minds today. He'd view human perception as the most predictable algorithm ever built. While everyone is obsessed with manipulating machines, he'd master the code that's been running for centuries: vanity, insecurity, and fear. Once you understand those three, you can forecast any person's next decision with near-perfect accuracy.
He'd never waste time wondering why people act irrationally. He'd accept that irrationality is the baseline and designed around it. For example, in a workplace full of egos, he wouldn't fight for credit. He'd let others believe they're winning while quietly positioning himself as indispensable. When the project succeeds, those inflated egos will fight each other for glory, and he'll already be on to the next opportunity, untouched, unnoticed, unchallenged. The beauty of thinking ahead isn't in grand predictions. It's in subtle setups that look like coincidence to everyone else. Machiavelli would also master what most people neglect: the rhythm of influence decay. He'd understand that attention has a half-life. Every reputation fades, every trend collapses, every authority weakens with time. But most people cling to their peak moment, unaware it's already dying. He'd planned his exits before others even realize he's withdrawing. That's why he'd never burn out or fade away. He'd always disappear slightly early, leaving behind absence that grows into legend. Because when you vanish at the height of curiosity, you don't lose relevance. You freeze it. He'd use this principle everywhere. In conversation, he'd end before others feel done listening. In relationships, he'd pull back just before dependence forms. In influence, he'd pause output right before people take him for granted. Timing isn't just about when to act, it's about when to stop. The person who knows how to end something gracefully controls the memory of it forever. But Machiavelli's true genius would lie in how he used contradiction. He'd never think linearly, he'd think in opposites. If everyone's seeking safety, he'd exploit risk. If everyone's emotional, he'd go cold. If everyone's competing, he'd cooperate only to shift the terrain later. Contradiction confuses predictable minds, and confusion buys time. In the game of strategy, time is the highest currency. You can lose position, you can lose allies, but if you still have time, you can rebuild everything. He'd also exploit moral certainty.
In today's world, people wear righteousness as armor. Machiavelli would see it as a handle, a place to grip and guide them. Those who must be seen as good are the easiest to control, because their actions are limited by how they appear. He'd simply give them chances to prove their virtue, knowing their need for validation will make them predictable. The real strategist doesn't destroy the moralist. He uses them as a shield. And while others obsess over outcomes, he'd obsess over positioning. You can't always control what happens, but you can control where you are when it happens. Machiavelli would never try to predict the next global shift. He'd position himself where every possible shift benefits him. That might mean mastering neutral skills, forming ambiguous alliances, or owning assets that thrive in both chaos and order. To him, foresight isn't about fortune-telling, it's about designing resilience. He'd understand that every move must create optionality. The poor thinker commits too early. The clever one keeps doors open until all others close on their own. Optionality is silent power, the ability to pivot without loss. Machiavelli would cultivate this in everything. Conversations that can lead anywhere, investments that can be reframed, relationships that can become either friendship or distance as needed. He'd build his life like a fortress with secret exits, never trapped, never cornered. But all of this would rest on one simple foundation: detachment from ego. The ego craves recognition for being ahead. The strategist craves the result of being ahead. That's why Machiavelli would look ordinary to most people. Nothing flashy, nothing loud. He'd move like water, calm, shapeless, but unstoppable. You'd never see his plans unfolding until you were already part of them. And by the time you realized it, you'd mistake it for destiny. To think ahead like him, you must train yourself to stop reacting and start arranging. Don't argue for your view, arrange circumstances so your view becomes self-evident. Don't prove people wrong, create an environment where they prove themselves wrong. Don't chase loyalty, engineer situations where betrayal costs them more than staying. Machiavelli wouldn't play chess to win. He designed the board so every piece eventually served his position. The world today worships visibility and speed, but Machiavelli would see both as traps. The real advantage lies in invisibility and delay, the patience to let others reveal their strategies, the silence to study them, and the courage to act precisely when everyone else believes the game is over. That's how he'd stay ahead of everyone else, not by knowing the future, but by building it so carefully that no one realizes they're walking straight into his design. Machiavelli would see modern life as a stage where everyone performs intelligence, but few truly practice it. Every opinion, every outburst, every display of certainty is a clue, a confession disguised as confidence. He'd collect these confessions silently, building an invisible archive of how people behave under illusion. Because in his eyes, humanity hasn't evolved emotionally, only technologically. The same vanity, envy, and fear that once ruled kingdoms now rule comment sections and boardrooms. The tools are new, but the weakness is ancient. He'd use that to his advantage through something few people ever master: strategic ignorance. Not the kind that comes from apathy, but the kind that comes from control. He'd know exactly what to ignore and when. Every piece of information costs attention, and attention is the fuel of foresight. By filtering ruthlessly, he'd ensure that what enters his mind serves purpose, not impulse. When someone insults him, he'd act as though he never heard it. When gossip spreads, he'd pretend to be the last to know, not because he's unaware, but because knowledge loses value once it's displayed. Strategic ignorance keeps others revealing while you remain unreadable.
He'd also weaponize generosity, but in his own way. Modern generosity often expects gratitude. Machiavelli's would expect dependency. He'd give not to appear kind, but to create leverage. When you give someone what they need most, a favor, an opportunity, a secret, you become embedded in their success. That's how you turn help into hierarchy. They won't realize they become reliant until they try to move without you and find the ground missing beneath their feet.
He'd never remind them of what they owe. He'd simply ensure they can't operate freely without his permission. He'd be deliberate about reputation. Most people try to look good. He'd prefer to look consistent. Consistency builds predictability, and predictability builds safety. Once people feel safe around you, they lower their guard, and that's when they become transparent. He wouldn't try to appear flawless. He'd choose a flaw and display it occasionally, one that makes him seem human, approachable. The rest of his weaknesses would stay hidden under layers of misdirection. The strategist doesn't just hide strength, he disguises it inside imperfection. He'd understand that real power isn't measured by how many people listen to you. It's measured by how few you need to listen to. Most people overconsume voices, absorbing opinions like sponges. Machiavelli would do the opposite. He'd listen rarely, selectively, and deeply. He'd let fools talk until their words betrayed their fears. Then he'd speak just once, and make that one statement rearrange the entire conversation. Brevity to him would be a scalpel. The fewer words you use, the sharper they cut. And he'd be painfully aware of one modern sickness, the addiction to certainty. Everyone wants to know they're right. He'd prefer to know when he's wrong, because the person who identifies their own errors fastest owns reality first. He'd treat every misjudgment as a compass, each mistake narrowing the field of truth. To him, arrogance is blindness in disguise. Humility, used strategically, becomes a vision enhancer. While others defend their beliefs to protect pride, he'd discard his instantly to protect progress. That's how he'd stay ahead even while losing, by turning every wrong move into an information harvest. He'd view social dynamics like weather, constantly changing but always predictable in rhythm. If a person praises too often, it's about positioning. If they criticize without cause, it's about insecurity. If they go silent at your success, it's about envy. None of it would surprise him because he'd expect it all. When you stop being surprised by human nature, you stop being manipulated by it. Machiavelli's greatest calm would come from expectation. He'd never demand virtue from the world, only advantage. But there's something deeper he'd never reveal publicly. His quiet understanding that strategy without empathy collapses into paranoia. He'd know that cold calculation alone burns out the strategist, turning clarity into cynicism. So, while he'd analyze people, he'd also learn to feel their patterns, not out of kindness, but accuracy. To predict someone's behavior, you must feel what they feel while remaining untouched by it. Detached empathy, the ability to understand emotion without drowning in it, would be his secret weapon in an emotional age. He'd also perfect the art of invisible influence. Modern people believe influence requires visibility, followers, recognition, dominance. Machiavelli would choose subtlety instead. He'd place ideas in others' minds like seeds, let them believe they were their own discoveries. That's how movements begin, when people carry your thought as if it were their own. He'd never fight to be the face of anything. He'd prefer to be the unseen spine, because the visible leader takes the blows, but the invisible one directs history. And at the heart of it all, he'd hold one timeless conviction. Every moment you spend trying to prove your worth to someone, you're already beneath them. The strategic mind doesn't chase validation. It studies it, then uses it. People reveal everything when they seek approval. Machiavelli would give them just enough recognition to keep them talking, just enough silence to keep them uneasy. Control isn't about dominance, it's about direction. You don't need to overpower people when you can quietly guide where their mind goes next. To think ahead like him is to train yourself in awareness so sharp it feels like foresight, to never speak out of impulse, to never act out of panic, to let others burn energy proving themselves while you conserve yours for the decisive moment. That's not manipulation, that's mastery. The modern world rewards reaction. Machiavelli would reward restraint. He'd be invisible until the exact second he needed to exist, and when he finally acted, everyone would say it was inevitable, as if the world had planned it that way all along.